Raphael. Desmond folded his welding visor up against the sun while the support skiff bucked atop a jade-green Atlantic swell. 30 meters below, invisible from the bright surface chop, waited the newest job that had lured him from Trinidad to the Grenadian shelf. The Eulalie Collection, an undersea museum, sunk deliberately in an extinct volcanic crater. The pay was triple his usual rate, the contract stamped by a shell corporation with a London address, and the maintenance list was cryptic. Seal leaks in life support lines, reattach anchor plates, rehabilitate interior lighting. Straightforward enough. What made the assignment odd were the non-technical stipulations. No photographs, no acoustic mapping, and a clause that required solitary dives. The client claimed the site was artistically sensitive. Raff had done military wreck work before and knew secrecy was sometimes political, sometimes smugglerish. Either way, if the money cleared, he welded. Beside him on the skiff, marine biologist Dr. Celine Augustin, seconded from the University of the West Indies, secured a tablet in a dry box. She was there purportedly to record environmental parameters, oxygen turbidity, the occasional curious reef shark flushed up from the deep. She was lean, bronze-skinned, and possessed a laugh like rain on a zinc roof. But Raff had exchanged only curt greetings. He kept romance topside and professionalism below. The deckhand hooked Raff's rig to the descent line. "You're up," he shouted over the engine. Raff exhaled, purged the last nerves from his system, and dropped back into the sea. Even through 4 centimeters of dome glass, the underwater museum looked more cathedral than gallery. The crater's circular wall rose like basalt pubics around a central plaza. Floodlights, most of them dark, the rewiring on Raff's punch list, were nested in coral clusters. But the objects that pulled at Raff's gut were the sculptures. Hundreds of human figures standing silent on limestone plinths, some halfway draped in sea fans, others pristine, their eyes open in a state of private recognition. The effect was as though a city square had drowned mid-conversation. He kicked toward the administration lockout, a stainless truss hatch welded to a habitat sphere, recycled from an old oil rig saturation module. Inside, compressed air hissed against his suit. As he removed his helmet, he expected the usual prefab interior fluorescent tubes, aluminum bunks, a humid pile of towels. Instead, he found a single person seated at a writing desk. She wore a curator's blazer the color of storm clouds, a tie of white silk, and around her neck a piece of carved black coral shaped into a spiral. She was older than Raff, maybe mid-40s, with hair cropped tight to her scalp and eyes that, inconveniently, seemed lit from behind, as though she had replaced her pupils with backlit sapphire. "You're late," she said. "Traffic on the seabed," Raff answered, brushing droplets from his beard. "Name's Raphael Desmond. I've a contract to maintain your museum." She shuffled a stack of calligraphied index cards. "I am Ianthe, caretaker and archivist. I know why you are here, but do you—" Her accent was Atlantic indeterminate, a swirl of Jamaican vowels, Trinidadian cadence, and something older. "I expect to weld cracked conduit, swap out ballasts, and keep everything structurally sound." Ianthe set down her cards. "The Eulalie collection is not merely structural. Each piece is a living memory, and your repairs must respect their timelines." Raff pressed his tongue against a dental filling, his private ritual when confronted with nonsense. "You mean the statues?" "They are witnesses," she corrected. "Some remember storms. Some recall weddings in coastal villages that sank generations ago. Some remember sorrows from centuries not yet past." Raff had heard every brand of eccentric patron, but this was the first time the art itself was supposed to be clairvoyant. He tapped the tablet strapped to his forearm. "Look, Ms. Ayonte, my contract is with Argo Pacific Holdings, and it says nothing about—" "You signed the rider," she said, sliding a parchment across the desk. "Clause 8. The contractor will refrain from acts that may alter or erase temporal impressions bound within artifacts. That is legal shorthand for Do not break the memories. He remembered the unread paragraphs he had initialed, drunk on the promise of a triple day rate, and cursed his carelessness. All right, he sighed. Tell me what to avoid. Ianthe said, standing. Everything is to be listened to. She guided him down a spiral hatchway into the plaza proper. The sculptures came closer, and Rafe saw they were not random. A mother braided a child's hair, a fisherman unspooled an invisible net, a sailor clutched a sextant whose brass surface was polished despite years underwater. They were arranged along radiating spokes, like hours on a clock. Why no photograph? Rath asked, checking the corroded junction box at the plaza's center. Because lenses steal without giving, Ianthe replied. Memories require reciprocal gaze. He chuckled. I'm a welder. My torch doesn't gaze, it burns. That is what worries me. She stepped aside, allowing him to inspect a hairline crack along the habitat's oxygen line. As he tacked a shielding plate in place, sparks fizzed, lighting the water in auroral greens. The statues closest to him seemed to shimmer in the heat warp illusion, he reasoned, until one of them moved. A young woman in sailor whites, Dominican insignia on her shoulder, turned her head ever so slightly, as though the weld's flash had woken her. Her slate-gray irises tracked him. Then, in the clean hiss of cooling metal, she froze again. Rath steadied himself on the scaffold. Narcotic depth. He was only at 6 atmospheres, not enough for helium narcosis. He blinked. The figure remained rigid, barnacles clinging to her cuffs. When he finished the repair, Ianthe waited, her expression routine, as though statues turning their heads was as common as sediment drift. Did you see? He began. Observation is participation, she said simply, and escorted him back to the module. That night, Raff lay sleepless in his berth aboard the support vessel. The air conditioner rattled and salt crusted the porthole. He summoned the memory of the sailor's face, the calm poise, the almost affectionate curiosity. If she was a dream, she felt embarrassingly tactile. He tried to dislodge her with thoughts of Céline topside, analyzing specimens under red cabin light, but instead of Céline's laughter, he heard Ianthe's earlier words. Some remember sorrows from centuries not yet past. Impossible, he assured himself. Then he read Klaus 8 again. Temporal impressions. Fancy semantics for intangible ambience, certainly. Yet the hair on his knuckles prickled like a meter needle, registering something just beyond scale. Day 2 brought an electrical storm that smashed foam against the skiff. Céline handed Raff a fresh tank and cautioned, watch the thermocline. The front may push colder water up slope. He nodded. You should come down sometime. The museum is different. Her brows arched. You mean beautiful. I mean alive. He regretted the words immediately. A scientist might forgive exaggeration, but not mystical babble. All ecosystems are alive, she conceded. Just remember, the deeper you go, the easier it is to see faces in the dark. He considered telling her about the sailor, but reserved the story for someone who already believed in living memories. Underwater, the storm's agitation translated into surging currents that swung the kelp-like cathedral incense. Raff mounted an inspection lamp on a tripod and set about rewelding a severed tension cable that moored the central obelisk to bedrock. The obelisk was carved with dozens of fingerprint depressions. No mortal could have left so many ridges so perfectly scaled. Inside each depression, bioluminescent algae pulsed like green fireflies. As Raff ignited his torch, the algae brightened collectively, forming a wave that traveled the obelisk's height and radiated down the spokes toward the statues. One by one, figures lit with brief firefly glows inside their stone chests, hearts greeting hearts. Ianthe approached along the plaza ring. Instead of diving gear, she wore no helmet, only the storm-colored blazer, which remained dry though submerged. Her spiral pendant glowed faintly. You are welding memories together, she observed. No bubbles left her lips. Raff killed the torch. I need air to breathe, and you're having a conversation like we're in a parlor. How? She ignored the question. Walk with me. They followed the glowing chain deeper into the arrangement until they reached a vacant plinth. Raph saw two outlines etched, ready for molds, one broad shouldered, one slender. Unfinished stone awaiting detail. An inscription ran around the rim in cursive Spanish. Lo que us lo sucede vive. Hui, what has not yet happened lives here. These are empty, he said. These are full, Ianthe corrected softly. They host a memory still ripening. It concerns a romance not yet lived. He rubbed condensation from his visor. Whose romance? She placed a hand on his chest right over his heartbeat. Yours? Raph laughed, helmet rattling. Look, I don't know what magic mushrooms you keep in the air scrubber, but my love life isn't art. It's barely tax deductible. Her palm remained steady against him, pressure unimpeded by glass. Through the curved visor, he felt her skin, though physics insisted that was impossible. Tomorrow, she whispered, if you dare a small risk, the memory will unveil itself. He stepped back, breaking contact, and the tactile illusion vanished. This is absurd. Is it more absurd than statues that breathe? She asked. I thought I imagined that. You imagine nothing. She nodded at the sailor figure he'd noticed yesterday. The Dominican uniform now held a bouquet of glimmering sea urchin spines, as though offering them to him. She ships out tonight. Drift too long, and you miss your embarkation. Ianthe's riddles ricocheted off his rational mind, but some deeper coil of intuition unspooled. Hungry. Topside that evening, Selene analyzed storm data via satellite link. Raph lingered by the rail, the crimson dusk pooling across the waves. He considered the risk Ianthe had mentioned. What could a welder risk besides decompression sickness and hyperoxia? Then he remembered the maintenance checklist, a final task still unchecked. Reattach anchor plate to East Annex ventilation duct. It required venturing beyond the museum boundary, where trench walls dropped into near abyss. The job wasn't complicated, but currents were unpredictable. At dinner, Celine sat opposite him, drafting notes. You look wired. Want to talk ocean pressure thresholds? I prefer stories. Maybe tomorrow. She smiled. Tomorrow, then. He slept poorly, dreaming of two stone shapes on a plinth, outlines softening into flesh. One was him, cheeks salt-speckled, welding visor cocked. The other wore scientist's coveralls and laughed like rain on zinc. Morning broke clear. The surface crew prepped Raph's gear. Celine adjusted his bailout regulator, fingers deliberate. East Annex today. He tried to keep his tone casual. Yeah, shouldn't take long. When I'm back, I owe you a story. She tapped his wrist to calibrate his dive computer. I'll hold you to that. He descended through sunshafts that dwindled to cobalt, then indigo. At the crater rim, he saw Ianthe waiting inside the main observation bubble, watching like a lighthouse keeper. No water swelled inside the bubble. She occupied a column of air that descended to the plaza floor, though no structural sheath contained it. Her presence was inexplicable. But today it felt almost normal, like passing a familiar ghost on a morning commute. Raph moved along the trench edge, his headlamp cutting spirals through huddled krill. The anchor plate lay flush against a ventilation duct that wheezed warm current. He locked a clamp, placed welding rod to metal, and pulled the trigger. White plasma burst, stitching steel to steel. A jolt knocked him sideways. The sea pitched, unseated by tectonic tremor. Silt plumed. The anchor plate slipped free. Alarms chirped inside his helmet. Ovia line kinked. Raph cursed and resecured the clamp, but the quake had fractured the duct, sucking away breathable air from the habitat orb. If the ventilation failed, the museum's atmospheric module where Ianthe apparently lived would flood in minutes. He radioed surface. Minor quake. Damage to life support line. Commencing immediate repair. Copy. came Celine's voice. Abort if risk escalates. Instead, Raf toggled silent mode and bolted toward the museum. He entered the plaza. Statues leaned like citizens in wind. The sailor figure's uniform rippled. She seemed on the verge of stepping off her plinth. Inside the habitat, the air was fogged with vapor. Ianthe sat at her desk, writing calmly. Water licked the floor. "Didn't I warn you?" she said. "I can fix the duct, but I need your data on internal pressure." She beckoned him close. "Remember the risk? It is here." He slammed a wrench against the pipe flange. "This is not romance. This is hydraulics." "Romance is always hydraulic," she murmured. The arts pump tides. Raf scanned gauges. Pressure dropping fast. He could patch external breach, but internal couplings required another set of hands. Surface protocols forbade bringing untrained personnel into the water column unsupervised. But Celine had dive qualifications, he recalled. To save Ianthe and maybe the entire installation, he needed Celine below. He transmitted. "Celine, I need assistance inside habitat. Bring portable bladder kit." A pause. "On my way." Ianthe smiled. "Good. The second figure approaches her plinth. Stop speaking in riddles and tell me location of Master Valve." She pointed toward the plaza's center. Raf sprinted, latching magnetized boots to walkway rails. He shut off upstream flow, slowing the leak. Moments later, Celine descended, a silhouette against floodlight beams. She entered the habitat. Her eyes widened at the flooded floor, but remained focused. "Ladder kit," she said, handing him the self-inflating patch. Together they navigated to the ruptured duct. Raf held the breach closed while Celine positioned the bladder, activated the epoxy charge, and sealed the fissure in a foaming embrace. Pressure stabilized. They exhaled in tandem. Raf felt a pulse under his gloves. Her pulse? Or the museum's? Floodlights warmed back to steady glow. Around them, statues straightened, as though sliding into calibration with refreshed memory. The sailor bowed, solemn gratitude. Celine observed all this with scientific calm, but wonder lit her irises. Did that statue just move? Raf removed his helmet, wincing at the stale air. Yes, and were apparently part of the exhibition. He led her to the vacant plinth. The outlines now held detail. A welder mid-stride, sparks frozen mid-birth, and a biologist crouched beside him, sealing a valve. Their stone faces bore serenity carved from certainty. At the base, a new inscription etched itself with glowing plankton. They saved more than stone. They saved the tide of what could be. Celine touched the carving of her own cheek. How? Ianthe arrived, water parting around her like parted curtains. The memory is now complete. It can breathe. Celine looked from curator to Rath. "You knew?" "Not exactly," Rath admitted. "I was told there was an unfinished memory about a romance not yet lived." Celine flushed, incredulous and amused. "Romance? We just met." "Romance is a long weld," he said. "You start with a spark, keep feeding the rod, hope the joint holds." He hadn't planned the metaphor, but it felt right. Ianthe regarded them with sisterly pride. A museum must preserve not only what has been, but what might yet save us. You two proved that the future can be mended. Celine squeezed Raph's gloved hand. "If this is the start of a living memory," she said, "I'd like to see how the next chapters look topside, preferably with coffee." He grinned. "I know a cafe in St. George's. Terrible view, great espresso." The statues around them seemed to lean closer, eavesdropping, hopeful. They broke surface mid-afternoon, salt glittering on their suits. The storm had passed. The horizon shimmered like hammered silver. On deck, Celine removed her hood, hair wild in the wind. "I need to file incident reports," she said. "But first, coffee." Roth laughed, finally liberated from all doubts. The future had taken material shape in stone at the seabed and in flesh beside him. Not yet a promise, but a possibility. One he intended to weld until it held. Months later, the Eulalie collection reopened, this time with public access virtual tours. Photographs were still prohibitive, but the museum offered participatory dive experiences, led by none other than Dr. Celine Augustine, with safety tech Raphael Desmond keeping watch. Visitors reported uncanny sensations, memories that were not their own, emotions blooming inside them like coral polyps. In the plaza center now stood two new sculptures of limestone and living algae. Tourists asked, "Who are they?" The curator, sometimes Iante, sometimes another staff member, but always speaking with her cadence, answered, "They are the welders of tomorrow's hearts." And somewhere in the shifting Caribbean light above, two real people learned daily what it meant to keep memory alive. They argued gently about coffee strength, hammered out joint lectures, exchanged slow smiles across lab benches, and each evening watched the sea darken, knowing that below them stone figures guarded a romance that would always be partly future, always being repaired, always alive.